Gene Stapleton and Carroll were the heart of the family for 9 years. Fans thought they were great. But Carroll said something to him, behind closed doors, that he never forgot. There was no fight. It wasn't planned. It only took one quiet word to change everything. Gene didn't say anything else about it. But Carroll kept it on his body his whole life. After the show was over and Gene said goodbye, he still thought about that moment. After many years, those who knew him well are finally telling the truth. What he said, why it was important, and why it still hurts for Gene Stapleton. The rest of the world saw Carroll as Archie Bunker, a loud, stubborn, and often rude American guy. She was thoughtful, emotional, and quietly strong in ways that don't show up much on screen though. They were the only ones who could really connect with him in a way that no one else could. It's Gene Stapleton. She wasn't just his co-star. He felt stable when she was around. Dawn added warmth and ease to every scene, making Archie's brashness and Edith's quiet heart work well together. What people saw, like their beat, chemistry, and perfect comedic timing, wasn't fake. It was true. They used that link to get through hundreds of episodes, often under a lot of stress, and with little time to breathe. Even though they were close, Carroll always remembered a terrible event that he would never get over. It happened in the later seasons of All in the Family, when people were getting tired and sometimes things got very tense. There was no yelling or scandal. Instead, there was quiet and small mistakes that made a mark. A crew worker who worked closely with them said that Carroll once said something to Gene during a break in rehearsal. It wasn't mean. It wasn't meant to be very hurtful, but it did. The words themselves were forgotten. They seemed rude and hurried. But Gene took it in without saying anything because she was always calm and professional. She gave him a soft look and kept practicing. It was never brought up again. Not once. But Carroll did. He talked about it again weeks and years later. Often without a break, other times without. He felt bad about what he said and told a close friend. That Gene should have had more. That she always had time for him, even when he wasn't nice. It wasn't just guilt. It was an honor. Very strong admiration for a woman who never asked for praise, but carried the weight of their most emotional scenes without complaining. The truth is that Gene's quiet personality sometimes made her pain hard to see. She would come to the set knowing all of her lines and having a fully formed character. She never made a fuss or expected attention. She wasn't flashy. She didn't have temper tantrums. But Carroll knew better than anyone how much she gave to the show, and how easy it was for that to go unnoticed. That's what kept him awake. It wasn't just what he said. What he didn't say was important. The thanks he didn't give in person. He never told her out loud how much he admired her while she was standing in front of him, still wearing Edith's cardigan and being the emotional center of a show that had become a national hit. When Gene died in 2013, many people sent her condolences. Fans remembered how nice she was. People who used to be on the show said how nice she was. But Carroll wasn't there to talk. He had passed away more than 10 years before, in 2001. That's what makes the quiet even stronger. Because a long time ago, the whole world was sad Carroll O'Connor and Gene Stapleton had already been sad about how far apart they were. Not a fight or betrayal, just a moment lost, a word he couldn't take back, and a kindness he never got to return. The actor who played Archie Bunker never really wanted to play the part. And when it came to Gene, he saw the difference between them more clearly than anyone else. She made him kinder on screen. Even though they were together, he forgot to be soft with her in one quiet moment. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't talked about, but he kept thinking about it. And the people who knew him best say he wore it. It wasn't like a wound, but more like a dull pain he never got to explain. She said that everyone in the family worked because it felt real, both in the writing and the acting. and Gene Stapleton's act pulled that show together more than any other. Carroll got people's attention with Archie's crazy personality, but Gene kept the chaos in check. She played Edith in a way that was soft, controlled, and naturally human. Off-screen, too, her grace made her liked by almost everyone on the set. Being together was never about ego. Carroll had more respect for Gene than he could say, which was also part of her sadness. He said nice things about her professionalism in talks. He talked about her heart, her voice, and her timing, but those were made public. He had trouble telling her straight out, face to face, without putting on a show. Jean, on the other hand, didn't need any attention. She showed up. She gave birth. She made everyone around her better. It wasn't just Edith she played. She knew what she meant. She gave light a part that easily could have been turned into a joke. She turned it into the emotional core of the show instead. She saw it every day. With a look or a breath, Jean could change the whole mood of a scene. He saw that she never tried to get attention, even when she earned it. He also saw that when she finally made up her mind to leave the show, she did so without any anger or drama. She just quietly stepped away from the stage and said that the character had reached the end of her story. He was more shocked than he thought by that choice. Everyone in the family had already changed into something else by the time Jean left. There were new figures added. The mood changed, but Carroll felt like her leaving meant the end of something holy. He told friends afterward that Jean was the show's soul that left when Jean did. Still, he never stopped thinking about that moment and the quick words he spoke. At that moment, he spoke carelessly to the person who had held so much of the show and him together because he was tired or distracted. He never said Jean was wrong for leaving. He thought that was great of her, but he always had a question. Had he let her down? That moment, that quiet conversation between scenes, also stuck with her. Of course, nobody is sure. Jean didn't say anything about it. She kept talking about how great Carroll was in public, calling him smart, kind, and complicated. However, quiet can be heard. And the quiet from Carroll, after that moment, after the show, and after she died, said a lot. People who were close to him say that he became more reflective as he got older. Not so much about memory, as about the people who made it possible. He talked about the family a lot, but not as a success. Instead, he saw it as a phase full of bad decisions and strong emotional bonds. He always spoke Jean's name in a soft voice. He never talked about her leaving without first stopping. When he talked about the time they spent together, he always did so with awe. Not for the job, but for her, because she made him better off screen and on. That said, Carroll O'Connor played one of the meanest characters in TV history. But people who really knew him knew that behind the rough exterior lay a man who was deeply capable of love, loss, and guilt. And that guilt never went away when it came to Gene Stapleton. It had nothing to do with a crime. It wasn't because of deception. It was the kind of sorrow that happens when two people never say everything they wanted to say. And every time Carroll looked back over the next few years, she felt that void. Because the worst thing he said that day wasn't it. What he didn't say next was the thing. While Gene Stapleton was gone, the show kept going, at least in name, with All in the Family. It kept Carroll O'Connor in the news when it was used as Archie Bunker's place again. The set looked like it was back. Even though Archie's voice was still very loud, something very important had changed. The money was gone. Fans could tell that there wasn't any contrast or warmth to soften the rough lines without Edith. Carroll did the same thing. In public, he changed. He made sure the show went on. Even in his later years, he put on strong shows. But in private, the people closest to him saw a change. His work no longer made him as happy as it used to. The beats he used to share with Gene. It was impossible to get the same level of trust, ease, an unspoken relationship. He missed her as a person, not just as an actor. She had helped us deal with the long hours. The rewrites were easy to handle, and the stress was lower. There was a void in every scene when Jean wasn't there. She never asked for recognition. And the silence made it even worse for Carroll to remember what he had said. In fact, he didn't remember the words very well. That made things worse. The look on her face, the calm in her eyes, and the way she blinked once and turned away were the things he remembered most. He knew right away that it had hit the wrong spot. He was sure she wouldn't talk about it, and she didn't. But something changed after that day. There were no big fights or distances, just a small thread that had come loose. Work got in the way of his plans to fix it, talk to her alone, and say sorry. The days went by quickly. Everything was needed for the show. After that, she was gone. That was the guilt he felt. Because Carroll O'Connor was always nice. He might be smart. He did have thoughts. He fought very hard for what he thought was right. He was careful with Jean, though, because he knew how important she was to him and to the show. That's why the guilt stayed with me long after the cameras stopped rolling. As time went on, Carroll spoke out more about his love for Jean. He said she was smart, a great performer, and a woman who never got the credit she earned. A friend heard him say that he wished he had told her more about that while they were still working together. It wasn't just that statement either. It was about all the times he didn't tell her how much he loved her. It might not have been important to Jean. It was private, humble, and deeply rooted for her. He felt bad about letting Carroll down, because he knew deep down that he had taken her kindness for granted. The whole world mourned Edith's death in 2013. Fans cried as clips of her performance went around, and writers thought about what it meant for TV. Carroll wasn't there, though. He hadn't been seen since 2001. It wasn't a public honor from him. There is no quote for the titles. There were no last words said in honor of his best-seen partner. Still, that doesn't mean there wasn't a loss. People who knew him say he always thought about Jean. She was more than just a co-star. She was the one who could handle Archie Bunker. Not just for people to see, but also for Carroll himself. She helped him remember what was important. She made the figure and the man behind it kinder. And when he thought about the years they spent together, it wasn't the fame or the Emmys that stuck out. That's when he didn't come back. The sorry he didn't give. The nice thing he never said out loud. Even though Carroll O'Connor said many great things on screen, the words he never got to say to Jean Stapleton were the ones that stuck with him the most. Carroll O'Connor's later years were marked by a quieter kind of thought as the attention on her life faded. The man who used to be the star of the most controversial show on TV now chose to be quiet instead of being the center of attention. He didn't do interviews very often. He was alone more and spent less time on stage. People who knew him well said that he seemed to be carrying something heavy than age as time went on. He was polite, cool, and almost formal when he was in public. Friends and family who loved him saw the change, but not in public. He was softer, took longer breaks in talk, and was more emotional about the past. Jean seemed to come up more often and more quietly than any other memory. He told the press all the right things when she left the family. He said she couldn't be replaced. He said there would be no more of the show. But he never really thought about it in private. Not the way he had to. Not in the way he would later say to close family and friends in private. He didn't break down, but something got darker. Carroll had already been through a lot of pain. The sad death of his son Hugh in 1995, and Carroll worked hard to get laws passed to stop other deaths like that from happening. That sadness changed him for good. Those who knew him best, though, say he felt two types of pain, one loud and one quiet. The first one was seen by everyone, in courtrooms and in the news. The second was private and personal, and it had to do with a woman he had always respected. It was a moment he wished he could change. After Hugh died, Carroll pulled away from the business even more. He carefully picked his end projects, and always did them with a goal in mind. But even in his last acts, there was a tiredness in his eyes that showed how he felt. It wasn't just old age or sadness. It was also the weight of unfinished thoughts. He told a coworker that everyone in his family had given him everything and taken more than they knew. He was popular because of it, but it also made him stuck in a role that didn't show who he really was. He worked hard for years to separate himself from that person. And Jean had helped him keep the balance. He'll never forget how she kept the show's emotional core safe. She dealt with the heavy topics, the political storms, and the awkward scripts with style. And how she made the emotional blows Archie gave Edith into something almost holy and unforgettable. Carroll didn't just see a co-star when he thought of Jean. He saw someone who had helped him live easier, do better work, and hide his flaws. He also deeply wished that he had shown her the same kind of love. He never said it was a fight. No one knew the exact words he used. But the way he looked at her every time her name came up was enough. It wasn't just one line. He was thinking about all the times he hadn't been thankful. The days he thought she'd always be there, always be nice, and always get it. Then she was gone one day. Carroll O'Connor passed away in 2001 from complications from diabetes, 2 years after his last playing job. Jean would die after more than 10 years. They had been apart for a long time before either of them died. But he felt like it wasn't finished in his heart.